Unmute myself. My apologies, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Today we're here to talk about property maintenance standards, specifically for historic properties. This is coming about over a long period of time, stemming from this general concept of preventing demolition by neglect, which has been on the mind of the HPC for some while. As we've had a number of new City Council members, I do want to provide some additional background here. So this concept of demolition has been discussed by the Heritage Preservation Commission since 2017. The Commission identified it as a need to address property maintenance of historic properties to ensure they don't enter a state of disrepair that ultimately requires demolition. These HPC felt very strongly about this to the point where when the city of Winona was blessed to host the Preserve Minnesota Conference in 2018, we actually flew in a keynote speaker from Raleigh, North Carolina to provide information related to demolition by neglect. Dan Becker is an expert in demolition by neglect, and he was able to talk to our commission as well as members of commissions from across the state. Following up on all of the discussions over time, the HPC submitted in 2020 a request for $4,000 in matching funds to pursue a 2021 certified local government grant to hire a consultant to address the property maintenance standards leading to demolition by neglect. Those funds were approved by the City Council in 2020, and we're looking for discussion here today before bringing it for a vote to apply for those funds in March. So what is historic preservation? I want to provide some additional background for those who might not be familiar. Essentially, there are two types. The first is the National Register of Historic Places, which is what most people think of when they think of historic preservation. Properties are evaluated and then nominated to meet the standards by the United States Department of the Interior, and they have to meet one of multiple criteria, right? Whether it's associated with a person who is prominent or an event of prominence, or architectural heritage or archaeological significance. This is generally seen as a recognition and honor for the site or district, and it does not provide any oversight of the property. However, it does also open substantial rehabilitation funding. So the door for the 20% federal historic tax credit and matching 20% Minnesota historic tax credit can cover up to 40% of a project's rehabilitation costs, which is substantial. In addition, properties that are either considered eligible or are on the National Register may apply for funds from the Minnesota Historical Society as well. Properties listed on the National Register of Historic Places must have the owner sign off for an individual nomination or must have a majority of property owners in a historic district sign off. On the right, we have an excerpt from the Sugarloaf nomination in 1990, which is a property that's on the National Register, but not on the local register. The second type is local designation. Properties that are locally designated have to meet the standards set in Winona City Code, Chapter 22.27, and one of the criteria that very closely mirror the criteria of the National Register of Historic Places, found in 22.27K5. This is reviewed by the Minnesota State Historic Preservation Office, the Heritage Preservation Commission, the Planning Commission, and approved by the City Council. It provides certificate of appropriateness review authority for exterior changes, permits, new construction, and demolition under Chapter 22.27L1. Here I want to note that the certificate of appropriateness process typically flows to city staff first in the consultation stage, and then is submitted to the HPC certificate of appropriateness subcommittee, and very rarely sees an ultimate public hearing. 93% of certificate of appropriateness applications are approved, and that's based on the last 3 years from 2018 to 2020. Local designation, unlike National Register designation, can be initiated in 3 ways: by resolution of the Heritage Preservation Commission, by request of 60% of property owners in a proposed historic district, or by petition of an individual property owner. On the right is a map of the Wyndham Park Local Historic District, which was nominated for local designation in 2016 and is currently being nominated for National Register designation. Some additional notes for the commission or for the council to consider. Neither listing on the National Register of Historic Places or the local designation will dictate the use of the property. Additionally, certificate of appropriateness are designed to be accessible. This process is free and typically is reviewed within 1 week of submission to the COA subcommittee. And lastly, the applicability of considering property maintenance standards needs to be known. Approximately 170 properties are designated in Winona, primarily in 3 historic districts: the Wyndham Park Local Historic District, the East 2nd Street Commercial, and the Winona Commercial District, commonly referred to as the 3rd Street District. And you can see a map of East 2nd Street and 3rd Street there below, circa 2014. So why historic preservation? The city of Winona adopted its Heritage Preservation Commission in the late 1980s, and I'm pulling directly from chapter 22.27, in that it finds that the historical, architectural, archaeological, engineering, and cultural heritage city is among its most important assets. This has a broad range of impact, ranging from tourism to general investment in the community. Specifically, I want to highlight the economic investment across the United States and also locally. Properties that are in historic districts typically have higher property values than non-designated properties. They typically maintain their value through economic growth and recessions better, and they typically contribute higher taxes per acre than non-designated properties. To the right of that is an analysis from 3 different neighborhoods: Oakwood, which is a historic district in Raleigh, North Carolina, and 2 newer subdivisions in Reedham Oaks and Windham. They're both roughly the same size at 114 acres, but the historic district outperforms at a taxes per acre level about 4 to 1 compared to the newer subdivision. Historic properties additionally are eligible for substantial economic incentives that I mentioned earlier: the 20% federal historic tax credit, the 20% Minnesota state historic tax credit, which matches the 20% federal, the Historic Society grants, and the Winona Downtown Revolving Loan Fund, of which 1/2 can be forgiven following 7 years. I do want to circle back to the historic tax credit and highlight that for every $1 spent utilizing the Minnesota historic tax credit, $9.17 in economic activity is actually created. The 2020 analysis from the University of Minnesota Extension actually indicates that that dollar amount has increased to $9.56. And the expectation is that in greater Minnesota, that number can actually approach $16 per dollar in the tax credit. So what is the process for addressing demolition by neglect? Primarily, it's found in the property maintenance standards and enforcement. City Code Chapter 32 dictates nuisances. We're proposing to use a certified local government grant to hire a consultant to analyze chapters 32.01 and 32.02, as well as chapter 22.27, which is the enabling ordinance of the Heritage Preservation Commission, to determine any deficiencies in identification, scope, and enforcement ability of property maintenance standards on historic properties. Secondly, to do an analysis of chapter 22.27 for review responsibility and enforcement capabilities of the Heritage Preservation Commission, and to analyze chapter 22.27 for any process improvements. This recommendation actually came in consultation with the Minnesota State Historic Preservation Office, who recommended that we expand the scope of the grant from just looking at property maintenance standards to also make sure that the HPC is humming along smoothly. And I think I can speak for many of us in city staff that sometimes it's a clunky ordinance written back in 1989. And lastly, we want to focus and make sure that public engagement is a key part of the process. We want the consultant to hold public meetings involving property owners of the historic buildings in our community and determine the ability of those property owners to address degradation and craft Winona-specific proposals related to the above. We want to make sure that everything that comes out of this process reflects Winona and not just taken from some other city. Winona's heritage resources are significant and they're different from other cities. So we need to have a Winona product as a result. So additionally, the consultant will be hired to address current funding programs available to historic properties and recommend improvements. I've already harped on this plenty, but there's 20% federal historic tax credit, 20% Minnesota State Historic Tax Credit, the Winona Downtown Revolving Loan Fund, and Minnesota Historical Society grant programs. There are additional grant funding sources across the United States. However, I want the consultant to make sure that we are actually proposing these different programs to our property owners in a way that's meaningful, meaning that there's education to actually access the programs, as well as assessing whether or not these programs can be improved in some way. Recently, as a result of the downtown strategic plan process, the Winona Downtown Revolving Loan Fund changed from 50% forgiveness to from 25% forgiveness to 50% forgiveness. I will note here, to go back, we want to highlight that there's huge return in these historic tax credit projects. In particular, some recent projects in Winona include 102 Walnut, Latch and Sons Building, the Beck Building, and 151 East 3rd Street. And for those of you who have been in Winona for some time might remember the 151 East 3rd Street, the Mason Jar Building, being held up by braces. And because of the historic tax credit project, they were able to reinvest in that property and bring it back online. And lastly, the grant availability. The certified local government grant proposed to be used for this would amount to $10,000 with the city match of $4,000 for a total project cost of $14,000. Certified local government grants are available only to certified local governments, which are required to maintain their standards with their historic properties in order to maintain their CLG status. This will be the drafts and the work output. City staff will provide the project management for the stakeholder meetings, code analysis, process, and draft work. Draft work will be reviewed by the Winona HPC for recommendation to the City Council, and the final work product for the City Council should include the recommendations for proactive enforcement, the drafted ordinance changes for 3201, 3202, and 22.27, and recommendations for financial incentive program improvements, education, and outreach. And lastly, our timeline here. On March 1st, City staff proposes bringing this to the City Council for approval to apply for the Certified Local Government Grant. The application deadline is March 5th. And then grant awards in May, sometimes early June, depending on how COVID's doing, with the goal of sending out an RFP to qualified consultants in June, consultant selection in July, and completing the project in May, subject to a timeline proposed by the consultant. Today, I'm really looking for discussion in any direction that the City Council can provide, particularly as it relates to property maintenance standards and whether or not property maintenance standards should be narrowly focused on the historic preservation aspect, or whether or not we should be looking at property maintenance standards in general. And to that, Mayor, I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Luke. Anybody have any questions? Yeah, Eileen.
I apologize if you mentioned this. I'm sorry, I came in a couple minutes late, but as far as the, it's on.
Yep.
As far as the demolition by neglect, I would be really interested in what proposed options there are for having more teeth in what we can do to address situations like that. So instead of just, you know, telling people you shouldn't do that, that there are actually consequences for it.
Yeah, and those, if I may respond, Mayor.
Absolutely. Thanks, Luke.
Those will be found in chapter 32.01 or 32.02. We want to make sure that the tools that we have in place are recommended from this process so that we aren't creating situations where we have to go in and put a lien on a property, which is unproductive and does not actually create a solution for our historic properties.
Yeah.
Hey, Luke, Aaron Rapinski, is there any property maintenance standards from a state level at all that we can look at adopting that's already kind of set in place?
Yeah, I've been working with the State Historic Preservation Office specifically so that we craft local standards at their recommendation. So rather than lifting anything specifically from the state, which does defer to local HPCs for their governance of local historic properties, we would be doing our own organic process for the city of Winona.
Steve, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Luke, for your work on this. So a phrase that you mentioned that I wrote down that I thought was important, and I'm going to look forward to seeing how you address it in your final product, is determine the ability to address. So I'm thinking through the lens of a downtown business owner, many of whom are struggling right now, and you know, we all have the same goal that we want a vibrant downtown. We want things working well. We don't want demolition by neglect. We all agree with that. But I'm going to be very interested. I'm going to think through the lens of that business owner. Most of them haven't seen the amount of traffic in the past year that they have in previous years, and how that ability to address those were the words that I copied down, is and really to Eileen's point, what those teeth will be. You know, we need to make sure we want this to work well, for our community as a whole and for the business owner.
I have one more question.
Go ahead, Eileen.
Just something that Councilman Young said. Also, I'd also be curious too, and I don't think this is necessarily something that maybe would be addressed in this particular thing, but as we think about historic buildings and especially our downtown historic buildings, a lot of times the business owners are not the building owners.
Yep.
And they are working in substandard buildings where perhaps the landlord owns many buildings and they could be fixing them up and they're not. And is there any redress for business owners who may not be the building owners to help, you know, use these tools to push the building owner along? Having worked in a couple of buildings like that myself, it's, you know, having to run around every time there's a rainstorm and put buckets around is not what business people want to spend their time doing.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Councilmember Mueller, if I wasn't sure if there was a specific question in there, but if there wasn't, I would like to address what you and Councilmember Young did mention. I think it's really important. The two words that I keep coming back to in this process is capacity and capability. We want to make sure that we put in regulations that don't exceed the capacity of property owners to maintain their buildings or do so in a cost-effective manner. But we also want to be cognizant of their capability to navigate these processes as well. Applying for a historic tax credit project is not particularly easy. There are processes that are often cumbersome for those who are not familiar with federal grant systems. Additionally, we need to make sure that we have the capacity at a staff level too. We can't be running out specifically just to our 170 historic properties only to address them because the lawn has grown too long while the rest of the city somehow manages to grow an entire forest. So we need to be very clear that our capacity and capability matches with whatever the regulation is that comes out from the process.
Thank you, Luke.
Mayor George here.
Go ahead, George.
Luke, what if for some reason I just, a building owner or homeowner, whatever it may be, just cannot afford to do these renovations? What happens?
That's what I'm hoping this process will be able to actually shed some light on. We don't want to end up with a process where we go up to somebody who owns a property and we say, listen, we're going to be taking your property and fixing it up ourselves and then putting a giant lien on it that nobody can afford to purchase. So I think preventative measures are going to be the most critical here, and making sure that we have the right tools for property owners to access is going to be the key. So if you happen to have a tree growing out of the facade of your building, how can we make sure that we're connecting you with the right landscape grant to make sure that somebody can go mow that tree down and then top point your building? It's really going to be important because this is what it takes to make sure that Sugarloaf doesn't suddenly have a rock slide that destroys the bluff is going to be very different from what it takes to address a 25 by 140 historic structure in downtown.
Mayor Aaron Rapinski here. Is this going to take into consideration when you talk about property maintenance standards on these historic buildings, 170 of them? Is this looking at such as maybe replacing windows that they have to replace it to a historic level again or historic look-alike? Or do they have is there some flexibility in there where the business owner or landlord or what have you have the ability to do things cost effective, even though if it's not restoring it exactly to historic standards? I've heard that's been kind of a concern in Winona in the past.
That's a really good question, Councilmember Rapinski. As we look at a lot of the review standards for historic properties, when you locally designate something, you take any responsibility for that essentially out of the hands of a lot of the federal or state oversight for some projects, so that the local Heritage Preservation Commission can say something like, yes, we do approve aluminum clad windows for that building, even though they probably should be wood, because we're more interested in making sure that your building is secure and weather tight than we are and we preserve the rest of the building than we are in necessarily making sure the wood windows are exactly that. There are provisions specifically related to emergency repairs already in code, but I would really like our consultant to take a harder look at 22.27 so that our guidelines are enforceable in a manner that's amenable to our property owners.
Thank you, Luke.
Luke, Michelle Alexander. I'm sorry I had to join late. I had a late meeting that ran long for work, but can you, and maybe you already addressed this, how are these different than the property maintenance standards that we already adopted for the city?
Yeah, that's exactly why we're going through this process, is to analyze whether or not those property maintenance standards are essentially good enough for our historic properties to make sure that these properties that have an intrinsic value to our community don't end up just facing the wrecking ball. So can we get ahead of anything like a roof repair that desperately needs to be done so there isn't extensive water damage or mold buildup within the property? I think that we're going to see that analysis probably come back with one or two very good recommendations specifically related to historic properties. But I am very pleased with our existing property maintenance standards, but we have seen some properties that are either eligible for the National Register or listed in the National Register or listed locally that unfortunately just haven't been well kept enough to be saved.
Mayor, this is Pam Iden.
Go ahead, Pam.
So, yes, I think anyone that's lived in Winona for very long knows that there have been quite a few important properties downtown and nearby downtown that have been demolished by neglect, basically. And for a lot of us grieve the loss of those. So I really do believe that the city needs some new tools to use to identify those properties and help people find the tools to fix them up, because we have to recognize that a lot of these properties are valuable to the whole town. I would like to see you broaden it a little bit and take on properties that may be eligible for the historic designation, maybe don't have the historic designation, but would be eligible for that, and to also help those property owners as well.
We'll look into that.
Okay.
Eileen?
Luke, I don't know if this is covered in the specific codes that you mentioned. I know we have design standards for new builds. Is that something that would be in the purview of what you are having the consultants look into? Like I
Yes.
know for like downtown, there are design standards for new builds. And I don't know how old those are. So I guess I'm just curious if we're thinking about those as well.
Yeah, the form-based design standards were adopted in 2017 with the Unified Development Code, and they are married very well with the existing regulations for the HPC review of certificates of appropriateness. However, there is always room for improvement. In particular, I think about maybe aligning things like the review periods. So when you submit a certificate of appropriateness, you're given 20 working days under our city code, but if you're submitting something underneath the zoning code, you're given 60 days under the 60-day rule. So maybe aligning some of those review periods makes it a little bit easier for people to navigate processes, but it is within the scope of analyzing chapter 22.27, yes.
Thank you.
Luke, this is Mayor Sherman. I have a question regarding capacity. It seems as though, at least from what we're hearing from community development and inspections, is this year inspections were through the roof. Do we have some type of forecast? Are we looking at that to drop back down again so we can increase our capacity from an HR standpoint in terms of being able to inspect and enforce these potential ordinance changes?
I would defer to Community Development Director Lucy McMartin, specifically related to the enforcement and inspections and anticipated improvements in the future. However, I do think that this process, as it's laid out before you, members of the City Council, is to really assess what our capacity is and make recommendations for the future. And if that recommendation has appetite from the City Council, for example, to expand the inspections division, to go out and categorize every single historic property and keep track of it every single year, then that would be the direction of the City Council to really adopt that recommendation. I don't anticipate that we're going to see something that's going to be onerous in terms of capacity, but it's something that we need to be cognizant of.
Understood. Thanks, Luke. Lucy, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, sure, Mayor and members of council. You bring up a good point. We are at quite a capacity right now in our
Yep.
building inspections division. Much of that is due to some heavy downtown activity, which is good to have. Also, the hailstorm, that was about 300 permits in Winona this past year. So I do think that we will have some capacity, but this is going to be largely on planning versus inspections.
Sure.
And I think we just have to find that right balance between, mandating something be done and someone having the resources and ability to do that. So that will be another issue we'll have to address during this process.
Absolutely. Thank you. And another thing, Pam had kind of touched on it, but it almost seems like even though we are just looking at the ordinances here, You know, the potential for collaboration with obviously some nonprofits in our community here, private entities, you know, those types of collaborations, I think, could really be encouraged through revisiting these ordinances as well.
Mayor, this is Gainey Hesser, if you have a moment. I'm the chair of the HPC and I'm recent to Winona, about 1.5 years, but I do have over 20 years within historic preservation and museum work. And I guess I just want to give a few points for my background. I actually did live in a historic preservation district in Bismarck, North Dakota. It was on the National Register. And I was an owner of a historic property and dealt with many of these things. And I would just like to kind of point out that they are.
You know, we lost you, I think.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can.
Yes. Okay. When did you lose me in my monologue there?
Bismarck.
Bismarck, yep, Bismarck.
I lived, my family lived in a house that was on the National Register of Historic Places in Bismarck, North Dakota, that had been woefully neglected when we purchased it. And we did a number of upgrades to it. And they were not everything that maybe the strict historic preservationists would want. And I guess I just want to say that from my own experience, that the responsibility of having a historic building is not onerous. It is a benefit to the economy. It is a benefit to the community, and that what is offered by having a community, or excuse me, a district or a home on the National Register is actually a financial. And so I guess I would just encourage the chamber to think about that, and what the demolition by neglect that we're looking at right now. Right now, this is just the first step. And I think in the long run, it is going to do nothing except benefit the community. And it's going to add value to those properties. And it's also going to help those, should they take advantage of it, is going to help the property owners too, to maximize what those properties could do. So I guess I'm just here to support, and I firmly believe that this ordinance would be a benefit to the entire community.
Thank you. Any other comments at all?
Yeah, Mayor George here.
Go ahead, George.
I remember back, I believe it was 69, 70, when urban renewal came in, wiped out Main Street. A lot of historic buildings there, wiped out 2nd Street, a lot of historic buildings there. So, you know, we're probably heading in the right direction here. So let's not have urban renewal again.
Thank you, George. Anybody else? Okay, we'll adjourn until 6:30 for the city council meeting.
Thank you.
It is 6:30 and I call this meeting to order. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Winona City Council and is being held via conference call pursuant to Minnesota Statutes 13D.021 in response to the COVID-19 emergency. Let me please remind those who are on the conference call line, please mute your phones until you are asked to speak. Also, please identify yourself before you speak. As required by the statute, all votes will be conducted by roll call, so each member's vote on each issue can be identified and recorded. Also, if at any time a council member is not able to hear the discussion or one another, please interrupt me immediately to indicate so. Also, just a reminder to state your name before you speak so you're easily identified. Tonight I've got a proclamation. Oh shoot, let's stop and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for that. All right, I do have a proclamation tonight. Whereas from early morning to late in the evening, from highways to county gravel roads, from sub-zero morning temps to warm spring afternoons, Winona's school bus drivers safely transport more than 2,700 students daily to and from school each day. And whereas school bus drivers are important figures in a student's school day, beginning with a positive influence from the moment the student boards the bus and every evening before they return home. And whereas our bus drivers travel almost 1 million miles each school year to transport our students within our district to and from school. And whereas students are nearly 8 times safer riding to and from school in a school bus than in cars, thanks to rigorous safety standards for vehicles, drivers, as well as student training efforts. And whereas we salute and appreciate school bus drivers every day and recognize the invaluable contributions they make in the education process. Now, therefore, I, Scott D. Sherman, Mayor of Winona, Minnesota, do hereby proclaim Wednesday, February 24th, 2021 as School Bus Driver Appreciation Day within the city of Winona, Minnesota. In witness hereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the city of Winona to be affixed the 16th day of February, 2021. I'd also like to announce I will be appointing some members to the 2022 Comprehensive Plan RFP Advisory Committee. Those members will be Council Member Michelle Alexander, Brian Bulow from the Planning Commission, he is the chair, Steve Sarvey, City Manager, Lucy McMartin, Director of Community Development, Carlos Espinoza, City Planner, and Luke Sims, Assistant City Planner. I would also like to take a moment tonight to wish my son Harrison a very happy 3rd birthday. He got a big old Jeep today. So, City Manager, do you have any comments?
I do have a couple, Your Honor. Thank you. 2 events. One is a virtual Live at the Levee. If you've attended one of our Live at the Levees, this one is the same, except for it'll be on a computer. It is going to be held this Sunday, February 20th from 4 to 6 p.m. Basically, it's free, but you need to register at thecityofwinona.com, so at the city website. It's in partnership with Merchants Bank, Tree Dome, and few others, folks. So you definitely need a computer. A tablet or smartphone works, but a computer or laptop works the best. But it's kind of cool. You get to virtually move around the space down at the levee, and you bump into people and you can chat with them. Meanwhile, there's music playing, and should be a good time. And then lastly, we have a 1-act play about memory loss called In the Garden, and this is the 2nd event for our Remember project. Tickets can be reserved. Again, it's free, and it's going to be held February 22nd, March 3rd, and March 14th. Tickets can be reserved at the on the Friendship Center website. And I attended the first one; it was very well done, and I expect the second one to be equally so. Folks who are either living with family members who are struggling with Alzheimer's or dementia, or their caregivers, these are really good events for you to participate in. Thank you, Your Honor.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. I will now ask the city clerk to take roll call. Members of the city council who are either present in the council chambers or participating by conference call, please indicate your presence by stating here as the city clerk calls your name.
Mayor Scott Sherman.
Here.
Councilman Young.
Here.
Moeller.
Here.
Alexander.
Here.
Iden.
Here.
Borzakowski.
Here.
Kropinski.
Here.
For each public hearing, staff will make a short presentation. I will then ask if anyone from the public wishes to speak to the matter. You must clearly state your name and address, and you will be given up to 3 minutes to make your testimony. I will call 3 times for public comments. Once the hearing is closed, the public may not participate in any discussion by the city council.
Required public hearing item 2.1 is to consider vacating the alley by St. Martin's Church.
And we'll open for public comments. I'm sorry.
Yeah, St. Martin's is requesting this alley be vacated. As you probably know, they did their school addition project. There are no utilities, either city or private utilities in this alley. They removed the electric and there was some gas that got relocated. There never was any city utilities, so there's no interest from the city or private utilities on this.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Okay, we'll now ask for any public comments, and I will ask 3 times. Does anybody from the public wish to speak? Does anybody from the public wish to speak? Hearing no one, we will close the public hearing.
Mayor George here.
Go ahead, George.
I would motion to introduce the attached ordinance.
Eileen will second.
We have a motion by George, a second by Eileen.
Mayor Sherman, Michelle Alexander.
Go ahead, Michelle.
I'm a member of this church and on the council, so I'm going to abstain from this vote.
Very good. Thank you, Michelle. Any other discussion?
Mayor George again with a question.
Go ahead, George.
Does St. Martin's, Brian or Michelle, do they own that entire block now, or is there one house on there yet?
George, there are 2 houses left on the block.
Okay. Thank you.
So Mayor, this is Pam. I have a question.
Go ahead, Pam.
Yes, I'd like to know what use, why does the church want this alley? What use will it be put to? I know in the past we've had, relatively unclaimed alley space, not too important to anyone, but we've been reluctant to assign it to a private party because it might be used in the future. What use?
Pam,
Yeah. Excuse me.
the church intends to have a phase 2 where they expand the school into a big gymnasium and attach the church to the school. So part of the alley would be closed off, and then they use the other side for pickup and drop off of tiny people. And so I think their intention here is to make it as safe as possible for drop off and pick up of preschoolers. And then their intention is to build over the alley that's down by the church now and make one big L-shaped building structure there. So ultimately, it wouldn't be an alley as we think of an alley anymore. It would only be open on one end.
Thank you, Michelle. Pam, did you have something else you wanted to say?
Well, yes, so they are taking over the alley itself. They're going to build on the alley. Is that their property, or is the city now assigning that to them, giving that property to them? I'm not necessarily against it. I just want to know how this is going here.
The way vacation works is if it was to be vacated, the alley goes to each adjoining, the center line of the alley towards the property owner goes to that property owner. Being that the church owns most of it, it would go to the church, except for the 2 homeowners.
And I take it that they're in agreement with this.
They are not in opposition.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian and Pam. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Sherman,
Aye.
Councilman Young,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Alexander,
Jane.
Iden,
Aye.
Borzakowski,
Aye.
Rapinski.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Under the petitions, requests, and communications, item 3.1 is a request for premises permit for Lawful gambling for the Eagles Club to be used at Cornerstone Bar.
I'm Michelle Alexander, make a motion to approve that resolution.
Eileen seconds.
We have a motion by Michelle, a second by Eileen. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Sherman,
Aye.
Councilman Young,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Alexander.
Aye.
Iden.
Aye.
Worzakowski,
Aye.
Rapinski.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Under unfinished business, item 4.1 is the Sustainability and Resilience Plan Consultant Contract.
I'm Michelle Alexander, make a motion to award that contract.
Eileen will second.
We have a motion by Michelle, a second by Eileen. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Sherman,
Aye.
Councilman Young,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Alexander,
Aye.
Iden,
Aye.
Worzakowski,
Aye.
Rapinski.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Item 4.2 is the Broadway project consulting fees.
I'm Michelle Alexander, make a motion to approve the attached resolution.
George will second that.
We have a motion by Michelle, a second by George. Any discussion?
Yes, this is Pam.
Go ahead, Pam.
I am very disappointed that that we have $300,000 that we're going to have to take out of our own mill and overlay budget. I'm very disappointed in that. I understand it says here there'd be 15 fewer blocks that would receive mill and overlay in 2021. So I'm interested in finding out, I know you usually do, Brian, bring this to council, but I'd like to know which streets are now going to get that favorable treatment and which are not. Broadway, which was going to be redone completely, I know between Franklin and Huff, it's in terrible shape. It's in very terrible shape. So I am also disappointed that I don't see that coming right up as well. So please let us know what's going to be redone with this money. And that's my comment.
Thank you.
Pam, the plan, we plan on doing a 3-year plan, but we have not done it yet because I don't know the results of this, kind of pending that. I will come back with something, but at this point, I cannot give you what our exact thing is for next year because I don't know what amount of money we have to spend for this year and the next 2.
Right, I get that. Thank you, Brian.
Yep.
Brian, quick question. When would you expect to have a better idea at least?
Within a month.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Brian. Any other discussion?
Mayor George here.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, a question for Brian. I think we chatted a little bit this morning on this. Looking at a $300,000 engineering and design fee, how did they ring up $300,000?
At the point that we were at about 90 to 95% complete plans. When you submit I know it sounds like a simple mill and overlay, but when you submit something to the federal government, you have to have complete plans. Every ADA ramp was fully designed. The storm sewer had a lot of redesign because of the new ADA ramps, and there had to be some storm sewer revamp with this. So being that said, and obviously with the federal process, there's a lot more paperwork and such that goes into it. So I understand it sounds like a fair amount for a project like this, but there's a lot of work that goes into it because it was a federal project.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Sherman,
Aye.
Councilman Young.
Aye.
Moeller,
No.
Alexander,
Aye.
Iden,
Aye.
Worzakowski,
Aye.
Rapinski.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Under new business, item 5.1 is the renewal of the property and liability insurance for 2021.
I, Michelle Alexander, make a motion to concur with the recommendation for 2021.
Eileen will second.
Motion by Michelle, second by Eileen. Any discussion? Go ahead, Jessica.
Excuse me, Mayor Sherman, we cannot hear Jessica on Zoom.
Mayor and council members, this is Jessica. I wanted to let you know that Gary Watts and Dustin Lano from Winona Agency are available to answer any questions you may have on the property insurance.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
Mr. Mayor, if I could chat just a little bit on this. So I talked to a number of people today, and including our friends at Winona Agency. They are our agent for this policy. Our policy is actually through the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust. There's approximately 800 cities that subscribe to that insurance. I read through our entire proposal here, insuring property and vehicles and general liability and all sorts of things, including cyber liability, which is somewhat new in insurance world. I particularly paid attention to our deductibles. We have a $50,000 deductible, and we could be on the hook for that 4 times. So that would be a total of a $200,000 deductible. Talked to Jessica briefly this morning. She was very helpful and helped me understand that we do have that money and considerably more in a reserve account to pay those deductibles or to pay excess work comp claims. We had that discussion about a month ago. Bottom line, I certainly don't have a crystal ball to predict the future, but it seems like from the people I talked to, again, I talked to Winona Agency, talked to Jessica, talked to an underwriter at the League of Minnesota Cities. It appears that our insurance package is appropriate for a city our size, and does what we need it to do. So again, don't have a crystal ball to guarantee the future, but we've got insurance to protect us as we should. So
very good. Thank you for that, Steve. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Sherman.
Aye.
Councilman Young.
Aye.
Moeller.
Aye.
Alexander.
Aye.
Iden.
Aye.
Worzakowski.
Aye.
Kupinski.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Item 5.2 is a call for public hearing to consider assessing costs for removal of hazardous structure. The hearing would be held on March 15th.
George,
I,
move to
Alexander,
approve the hearing date.
I, Michelle Alexander, will second.
We have a motion by George, a second by Michelle. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Sherman.
Aye.
Councilman Young.
Aye.
Moeller.
Aye.
Alexander.
Aye.
Iden.
Aye.
Worzakowski.
Aye.
Rapinski.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Item 5.3 is the comprehensive plan update.
I, Michelle Alexander, would make a motion to approve the 2 attachments.
George will second that.
We have a motion by Michelle, a second by George. Any discussion?
Mayor, this is Pam.
Go ahead, Pam.
In taking a look at the comprehensive plan preliminary topic list, on number 5 on transportation, I would like to call out, please, that we take a look at pedestrian safety. The transportation list includes transit, airport, water traffic, etc. I'd like to reference the Complete Streets program, Complete Streets plan, as we have referenced other ARCS plans in this. So take a look at that, see where we're at now that Broadway is not going to be redone. I think we need to take a careful look at pedestrians.
Mayor.
Go ahead, Eileen.
I know that a lot of this is parenthetical and examples, so I'm certainly not thinking that our staff is leaving anything out, but as far as housing in neighborhoods and parks and historic preservation, a lot of the areas of our city that are named in this list in the parentheticals, none of them include the west end of town or the west central part of town. I just want to make sure that that's not something that's missed. We talk about near the lake and downtown and the east side a lot, and the west side of town needs some love and attention. And as Pam mentioned, transportation, also want to make sure that our public transportation is included in that, specifically our buses. Transit, yes, excuse me.
Very good. Thank you, Eileen. Any other discussion?
Let's see, I have another comment.
Go ahead, Pam.
I'm sure this will be included. You're not waiting for me to mention that Winona State is apparently also doing its 5-year plan right now. So under number 10, transformative projects, I think that might be included.
Pam, I appreciate that, and I can actually speak to that. We did have a meeting with WSU, and we're putting them together. So they should be working on this, at least touching base along the way. So absolutely good point. Thank you. Any other discussion?
I have one other thing.
Eileen, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that I'm really, I appreciate what's been put together by staff and by Engage Winona so far. I think that from the engagement pieces that Engage Winona has done thus far for the city, we've seen a lot of really great participation. And so I'm looking forward to that continuing. So yay.
Good point, Eileen. I would like to state to the public that this is going to be a phenomenal opportunity for your input to be heard. What we're really doing here is we're creating a plan for our city for essentially we're looking out 25 years from now, but this plan will probably be in place for about another 10 or 15 years once it's completed. And so it's really, again, an excellent opportunity for the public to have input on what our city should look like. So I appreciate all the work that's gone into it so far, and I know there's a lot of work ahead by all of our city staff. So thank you. Any other discussion?
Mayor George here.
Go ahead, George.
For the city manager, what's our budget for Engage Winona on this project?
Mayor and council, I don't recall. Is Carlos on?
Yes, Steve. Carlos Espinosa, city planner here. Approximately 50,000.
That we are paying Engage Winona, or the whole plan?
That Engage Winona. That would be Engage Winona's portion, and that's a preliminary number. We would return to council with a contract for Engage Winona and the separate consultant at a future date.
Thank you.
That's over 2 years as well.
Thank you, everyone. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Sherman.
Aye.
Councilman Young.
Aye.
Moeller.
Aye.
Alexander.
Aye.
Iden.
Aye.
Borzakowski.
Aye.
Rapinski.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Item 7.1 is council concerns.
Tonight, we'll start with George again.
All right, thank you, Mayor. I just simply want to say a big kudos to the street department for their snow plowing efforts here for this entire year. Every time there's any type of snow, they're out there, heavy, light, they're sanding, they're salting, as is the county and the highway department as well too. So I think our roads that are well traveled are in pretty darn good shape. And thank you to Mike Biggerstaff and his whole crew for that. Then I just want to acknowledge some passings for some people that I know quite well. First of all, to Kurt Mim. who passed away here. He was the Peerless Chain Personnel Director before it became a Human Resources Coordinator. And Kurt served in that position with Peerless Chain for almost 30 years. And Kurt always had one strong trait. He could always listen to people, and I believe I got that trait from him. So to his wife, Barb, and his children and grandchildren, condolences on his passing. Also, I want to acknowledge the passing of Joe Walensky, known as Polish Joe. He served in the Marines many years ago and served our country well, and very, very proud. He always wore the Marine hat, the Marine clothing, and he's just simply very, very proud of being in the service. And also, he was always up for a good conversation, and he was always a good time to talk with. To his wife and his son, Tony, and the daughters, condolences on his...
I think at the right time, I got 2 cars behind me.
Are we okay yet?
I don't know what that was, George. It's very weird.
And also, I just want to offer condolences to the Robert Werner family on the passing of his wife, grandmother, and mother. Thank you all, and have a good rest of the week.
Thank you, George. Next, we'll go to Michelle.
Thank you, Mayor. I have nothing tonight.
Thank you, Michelle. Pam.
Actually, I have nothing tonight also.
Thank you, Pam. Eileen.
Nothing from me.
We're burning through them. Eileen's done. Steve.
I've been told to speak only if you can improve the silence, so I'm gonna pass.
All right. Council Member Rapinski.
I think all my thunder has been taken this evening, Your Honor. Just wanted to again give condolences to Tony Walensky and his family and his father's passing.
Very good. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, members, for all that extra time.
Thank you for you, George.
Then we will move to the consent agenda, which has one item, the approval of the minutes from February 1st.
I'm Michelle Alexander, move approval of the minutes.
Aaron seconds.
We have a motion from Michelle and a second by Aaron. Hearing no discussion, vote by roll call.
Mayor Sherman.
Aye.
Young.
Aye.
Moeller.
Aye.
Alexander.
Aye.
Iden.
Aye.
Borzakowski.
Aye.
Rapinski.
Aye.
Mayor, Michelle Alexander, move we adjourn.
Motion passed first, but then yes, you can make that motion.
George will second that motion.
We have a motion by Michelle, a second by George. We'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Sherman.
Aye.
Councilman Young.
Aye.
Moeller.
Aye.
Alexander.
Sorry, I guess I thought I had somewhere to be. Aye.
Iden.
Aye.
Borzakowski.
Aye.
Rapinski.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.